Oh, hi. I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. Yes, we are amongst the palm trees, the flora, the fauna of South Florida. Oh boy, having good fun here. Stacy.
We're also amidst the fish face and clown cars. That's the episode this time. And I'm going to look at this first headline here. And I want to show you when I look at the US dollar, when I look at US dollar monetary policy, when I look at global monetary policy, this is what I see. And I see it so much so that I actually tweeted it. The dollar after yet another round of free money injected into markets by the Fed. This was referring to a New York Post article in which you see this image of a woman before and after. Woman with the world's biggest lips is getting even more injections. You know, when I look at the US dollar as it was in 1971, that's what I see. When I look at the US dollar now, this is what I see. On top of that, this woman is getting more injections, and the Fed keeps on talking. First, they say they're going to taper. I'm going to reduce the size of my lips on the US dollar. But you know they'll inject it with more. You know they'll inject more silicon into the economy, more free money, more free credit, more stimulus into the economy, and we'll get even more absurd lips on this economy.
Oh yeah, well, you know, this has been going on since Alan Greenspan in the 1980s. Bernanke, Janet Yellen, Jay Powell, they lie. They say that they might be reducing rates or tapering, but in fact they're just going to print more money. And I think that to give people an idea of how bad the situation is, or to be more honest about it, they should inject their lips with some kind of filler every time they testify before Congress, because they are in effect lying. And over the years you'd have, like, Alan Greenspan's lips would be stretching from Eccles Building in Washington all the way to New Jersey. Jay Powell, because he's relatively a newcomer in the job, his lips might only be 3 feet long. You know, it's like the old Pinocchio with the nose. Every time you lie, you know, your nose goes extension. Here they should have the lips, like they inject it right there in the testimony. Just roll him on the floor, stick a needle in his lips, inject him full of filler, and get those lips out as much as possible to let the people know what the status is for interest rates and money printing in America today. This is an honest representation.
If you go shopping, however, grocery shopping, everything you need to eat, you need to pay your utility bills, you need to pay your rent or your mortgage, you need overhead costs. Those are the basics. You don't have to be rich, you don't have to be poor, you don't have to be anything. You have to pay those bills. Those are the bills you have to pay. You could see the lip injected economy there. You could see the price of chicken, the price of pork, the price of beef, the price of tomatoes, the price of avocados, anything you need to buy, milk, water, anything, the price has gone up. That is the equivalent. When you show up at the cashier at the grocery store to pay, like it's just big giant lips telling you, oh, there's more. We're not printing money. We're not printing money.
Yeah, it's patently false. And there's a meme out there, another meme, talking about how inflation's good for poor people. Of course, that's also a lie. Because they rationalize it by, well, the poor people can go as deep in debt as they need to pay for their basic groceries until such time as they get cut off from the credit lines, and then they're living under a bridge. And I suppose that's good for Americans too. Wow.
So I just compared that woman, and, you know, fair enough if she seems to like the way she looks. Jay Powell seems to like the way the dollar looks. And I'm going to show you a meme created by an internet artist. It's on the internet. There's no source. There's no Basquiat named. There's no Warhol named. It's just called the internet. And the internet created this meme. First, we see Jay Powell. There is no inflation, he said. Remember when he said that last year? Then, remember a few months ago, he said there is inflation, but inflation is transitory. So as we see, he's put on his clown lips and his clown eyes. Then he said inflation will ease next year. Remember when he turned there? Well, that's when he put on his clown nose. And then another injection of QE and stimulus and money printing and all of the prices starting to rise. Well, inflation is good. He's gone full clown mode.
Right, well, there's one missing, you know, and if you watch Keiser Report, you know. The one that they're missing is the one that comes even before those, and that's the one where they call deflation a lack of inflation. They mislabeled inflation as deflation. Because look, since the end of the Depression in the 30s, there's been never a time period when the US dollar was not losing purchasing power. There's never ever not been inflation. There's only been fast or slow inflation. And there was a time, preceding the last 10 years where they had engineered the economy so that assets went up for the top 1/10 of 1% and labor didn't move because they were penalizing labor and sending it all to China. And that's how now you have 100,000 overdoses of fentanyl in America a year. Thank you, Jay Powell. And they called that deflation. But in fact, that's not even true either. That was also inflation.
Okay, so we have the clowns in charge. We have a clown car Federal Open Market Committee running things. And here we are, Max and Stacy, and we've been reporting on the financial system, the monetary system, the banking system, all of it. And what we see is what we started with at the top of the show. They think it looks normal. They're happy with how they look, how the dollar looks. We see something shocking, right? And Ray Dalio also sees it, okay? Ray Dalio is a beneficiary of the clown car fish lip economy. He's a paper multi-billionaire who has lived well off front-running all the Fed's clown car antics. And he sees this. This is from his latest writing on LinkedIn, but Zero Hedge covers it this way. Dalio, dangerously high risk of civil war in America. In his new book, Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order, Why Nations Succeed and Fail, Dalio points to the 6 stages of an internal order-disorder cycle and estimates that there is a 30% chance of civil war.
Right, and of course, when you said he wrote that on LinkedIn, it sounded like he was talking about Lincoln, going back to the previous American Civil War. But we've talked about the rising chance of civil war in America, and it could either be between the have-yachts and the have-nots. It could be between the Bitcoin states like Texas and Florida, between the non-Bitcoin states. But the rising tension is palpable because of the rising Gini coefficient, as it's known. The spread between the very top and the bottom is getting extremely wide. And people have this global insurrection against banker occupation mentality we've been talking about for 10 years. Now Ray Dalio is finally figuring it out. This goes really with the theme from a couple of summers ago, where the folks out in the Hamptons in New York were afraid of the pitchfork and torch-bearing deplorables that Hillary Clinton called, and they were building bunkers underneath their East Hampton estates to protect themselves against the deplorables. Well, now Ray Dalio says that from his pedestal over there at a failing managed money firm in Greenwich, Connecticut, that he sees the Civil War risk at 30%. Well, I'll tell you this, the risk of civil war is at 100%.
At the top of the show, we pointed out the clown car and the clown that is Jay Powell that has created the fish lips of economics. That is the reason why we're having civil war. It's the cantillionaires. The cantillionaires are those giant inflated lips on top of our economy. Anybody who looks from the outside can see this. They could see that we have giant fish lip economics, the wealth and income gap. I think that's why you're seeing all that sort of sense of deplorables, all the hoaxes created like Russiagate, all those sort of things in order to justify in their mind. Now, I personally had a roommate many years ago, 20, 25 years ago, who had nothing until she inherited something like $50 million overnight. And she became like this sort of thing where she justified it. She kept on having to write herself messages that she deserved this money. She worked hard for this money. She didn't work hard. She inherited a whole bunch of money from a random great aunt that had just left her this money that she wasn't expecting. So the justification is the projection, all the psychological issues they have with it, the guilt is there every night on cable news. Now, Ray Dalio looks at it, and what he says is that, for example, when close elections are adjudicated and the losers respect the decisions, it is clear that the order is respected. When power is fought over and grabbed, that clearly signals a significant risk of a revolutionary change with all its attendant disorder, he writes, adding that a vast number of people, including high-ranking officials, have openly doubted the validity of recent elections and have expressed a willingness to fight for their beliefs. Now, this is beyond just the January 6th situation that is now playing out on the news. It is also 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2020, and all the John Durham investigation finding that so far, the people he's arrested, it suggests that high-level officials in the Democratic Party were also concocting, just like the same guys cosplaying on the Capitol. They're the same. They're two sides of the same fish lips.
It's cognitive dissonance to a degree of fatality, a fatal cognitive dissonance. It reminds me of this Hillary and Alec Baldwin story, where Alec was on ABC News and he said point blank that he pulled back the trigger of the gun, released it, a bullet went off and killed somebody. And then his wife the next day was on Instagram saying how much she loves her husband and she hopes they find the guy who killed the woman. Like, hello? Anybody home? This is essentially Jay Powell is saying, we printed $50 trillion or 60 or $100 trillion and we're going to keep looking until we find out where this inflation came from. We're not going to stop until we find out who caused all this inflation. It's like, hello?
Excuse me, but they are doing exactly that. They said with oil, as we mentioned, like when the oil prices went up, they want to investigate Russia, Saudi Arabia, all these oil speculators. When food prices going up, same thing. They keep on cobalt prices, they want to investigate China. So they keep on blaming everybody else but themselves. Elizabeth Warren, remember she said that she wants to investigate these corporations. Why are these profits going high? They're getting greedy. It's like, no, you're the one printing money. You have giant fish lips.
Yeah, I released the trigger on the gun. It fired a bullet.
The money printing gun.
The money printing gun was fired, and it caused inflation, and people are dying. And I want to know who pulled the trigger. I know somebody did. Who? Put your hand up. Who did it?
Well, if we had that money printing gun here, you would be like pulling it right now and it would be spewing all the dollars. And that's what we're seeing. The clown car with the giant fish lip economy and monetary system. Max and I could see this. You could see this. That's why we buy Bitcoin. That's why President Bukele of El Salvador bought Bitcoin while it was dipping this past week, while we've been here in Florida. So thank you for joining us in Florida, because you have an interesting next episode. I might say we were on the beach. We ran into our friend Mark Moss. And just so you know, there might be some blurred out images in the background because I was just focusing on the two of them. I didn't see some of the G-string sort of women walking by in the background.
Wow. All right. I'm going to check this out. Hopefully it's not a clown car, but the real thing. All right. Don't go away. Much more coming your way. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to bring back Mark Moss of Market Disruptors podcast. He was on recently. Had to have him back because the guy is on the bleeding edge of everything that's vital to our lives. Mark, welcome back.
Thanks, Max. Always a pleasure to hang out with you, especially in a beautiful place like this.
Yeah, I'm feeling the sun. I'm feeling the love. You mentioned something we were chatting before, which I thought was a good place to begin this. 9 Meals to Anarchy. Sounds like a great Hollywood movie. What does it mean?
Well, it does sound like a movie, and it means almost exactly what it sounds like, which is anybody that goes 9 meals or more without eating, skips 9 meals, is ready for anarchy.
Right, and the reason this is interesting is that the playbook that America's occupying forces, the CIA or foreign intelligence, that they've played in foreign countries for decades now, they seem to have run out of countries to occupy and mess up, and they're applying a lot of that knowledge to America. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's unfortunately true. I mean, that's what I've been told anyway. I'm not Special Forces, but I was recently with some Special Forces guys that were kind of advising us, and they said, hey, we've been deployed all over the world to destabilize nations, and we're telling you that the same playbook that we run there is the same thing that we see happening here, and the food becomes a problem, right? And that's always the trigger point.
Right, and we know that food price inflation is hitting 10, 11-year highs. It got to very extreme levels in 2011 when we saw things like Arab Spring and other global phenomenon. It seems to be heading that way again. Now, anticipating this, if you look at markets, they're discounting mechanisms and they're very sensitive and they kind of take the global pulse in a lot of ways. Some might say this is why Bitcoin's at $50,000, $60,000 a coin, is that it's anticipating a certain global disruption. Your thoughts?
Well, I think that's definitely true. I think a lot of people also would look at gold and say, why isn't gold doing its thing in the era that we've had the highest inflation? Gold's kind of flat, and I think it's because Bitcoin is sucking up a lot of that retail gold demand. And so to your point, yeah, I would agree that Bitcoin is kind of responding, or I should say preparing for that event.
Yeah, and when you talk about Bitcoin in a period of political upheaval or political change, people start talking about, well, what's my strategy if things start to get hairy? Certainly the politics in the United States is getting very uncertain.
Yeah.
And people more and more are talking about so-called citadels,
Yeah.
where people are kind of aggregating in communities of like-minded people.
Yeah.
I heard a phrase from you a little bit ago, which was I hadn't heard before, a mesh-adel. A mesh-adel. What is that?
Yeah, so a mesh network would be, typically it's used for phones, although now you go buy a Wi-Fi router for your home, it's a mesh network. And so a mesh network would be like in, for example, in Hong Kong, when China was going in there before the pandemic, they shut down the internet, they shut down the cellular, and so people could use a mesh network with their phones and kind of create their own networks. And so mesh-adel is a similar way where I can create my own citadel, but I can mesh it with other citadels. Because at the end of the day, if things could potentially get as bad as some people think they could, we may have to have to produce a lot of our own stuff, a lot of our own food, a lot of our own goods, a lot of our own equipment, etc. And so obviously with specialization, we can't do it all. And so if we can mesh network with other citadels, then we can have, be much more resilient.
Right, and interestingly, people, when they talk about Bitcoin, they say, well, what if the electricity goes down? Well, in fact, that's not a problem because of these mesh networks that can pop up. There's battery-operated nodes on the mesh network that is based on kind of, many of them, a swarm of them in areas. And then, of course, Blockstream can stream satellite data on the Bitcoin block down to planet Earth, as it were. So we really would be protected against a huge failure of telecommunications.
Yeah, I think anyone that asks that question is probably not really thought through why they're even asking that question. I say, so what's the probability of the entire world's electricity going out at the exact same time for a long period? I mean, it's not zero, but it's almost zero. Like, why do you ask that, right? I mean, we have generators, we have solar, we're not going to go without electricity. And to your point, with the mesh networks, we can keep the Bitcoin network going.
Yeah, it can run on batteries.
Yeah.
And satellite streaming. So, and that's already in place. Now let's talk about El Salvador. You've been to El Salvador, you've been on the ground there, you've been surfing there, you're a surfing aficionado.
Yeah.
There's the big surfing contest actually there now, one of the biggest in the world in El Salvador.
Yeah.
And so what's your perception? What's your take on what's going on there? The president, Bukele, has made Bitcoin legal tender. Tell us what's going on.
I think there's a couple things. So to your point, I've spent a lot of time in Central America, Mexico, Central America, surfing. I go to very rural areas, and so I've spent a lot of time there. But in El Salvador specifically, I think one big thing is like the president, he's a 40-year-old guy. He gets technology, he understands the younger generation versus the president of the United States. There's a pretty glaring difference there. I would say though, he also doesn't have, the world's reserve currency to protect. So they don't have a lot to lose there. So he's willing to try and experiment with other things. But I would say that he seems to be embracing Bitcoin, and not just Bitcoin. I think from the outside perspective, again, I haven't met with him personally, but it seems like he might have been trying to find ways to bring economic prosperity to his country, by embracing Bitcoin. But now, just like most people, once they take once they're orange-pilled, they start going into all the other ethos of Bitcoin, which is freedom and sovereignty, and it seems like he's doing a lot of great things for the country.
Right, success in business and success for countries over the past half century or so is tied to economies of scale, right? So in the United States, you have burger chains and fast food restaurants, and other parts of the economy get huge because of the economies of scale and rolling out to 250 or 320 million people in an economy that's protected by a lot of rights with the Constitution.
Right.
But it seems like in the 21st century, we're entering into kind of the reverse of that. Those countries that are smaller, entrepreneurial, and agile are going to beat the big behemoths. It seems. What do you think?
Well, that's exactly right. And I would add to that I think that El Salvador is so much more important than most people realize, because obviously the Bitcoin piece is important. But I think it's even more important than that because it's easy to kind of the point you're making that the whole world is trending towards authoritarianism. And technology is evolved to a point where they almost have the tools they need to have like permanent enslavement, right? History is a story of cycles of oppression, revolution, freedom, and it just it repeats. But that cycle could be forever broken because technology could give these authoritarians a way to keep us permanently enslaved. I think the only thing that breaks that trend is not war. What breaks that trend is competition. When states compete, when Texas and Florida outcompeted New York and California, both governors found themselves on the chopping block, right? They were outcompeted by states. But what about when nations outcompete? So the president of El Salvador has said, hey, we have no mandates, we have no restrictions, we have no taxes. Come, make all the money you want. Well, guess what? A lot of people want to go there. And once other countries start seeing that and seeing all the investment capital that's come in, they're going to want to do the same thing. And that competition, I believe, will force these giant nation states to relax and open back up.
Right, competition is really what made the U.S. a great power in the 20th century. But it seems like people in Washington now are talking about neutering all competition by flooding the system with free fiat money streams where there's no competition needed. You're simply gifted all this fiat money, which sounds nice at the beginning, but you end up losing confidence in the currency. You end up in a hyperinflationary currency collapse. It's hard to imagine the US dollar going into a hyperinflationary collapse, but there is now some speculation about that. How do you weigh in on that?
Well, I've been talking about what Mises calls the crack-up boom quite a bit. And in the crack-up boom, he says that suddenly, when the people realize that inflation is intentional and forever, which of course it is, 2%, right? And it's forever. So when people realize that, all of a sudden, the people will have a loss of confidence in the currency and it will all fall apart, basically. I'm paraphrasing. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing. So people, you know, the internet has now kind of shown the emperor has no clothes. We start to see that, hey, they do have this permanent goal of inflation that's permanent. We can see where that leads, and the confidence is crashing really fast. As a matter of fact, there was a recent poll that was done, a pretty big study. I think it was 11,000 people polled in 76 countries. 46% of the people said they trusted Bitcoin more than their local currency. And so that trust is very fragile. It's falling apart. People are realizing inflation is here to stay. The trust is being lost, and Bitcoin's there to reap the rewards.
Right, the crack-up boom. This is what happens when you have a currency collapse. We saw it in Weimar, Germany. And this begot, of course, the speculative attack against the central bank. So a lot of industrialists in Germany, they were borrowing money from the central bank, buying assets with it that went up in value in the currency collapse, and they became very, very wealthy. Here you have a couple of examples. Michael Saylor at MicroStrategy borrowing money on the wholesale market at pretty low rates and buying Bitcoin with it. You also have El Salvador is floating volcano bonds, essentially in dollars, but they're using the proceeds to buy Bitcoin. Is this the sign that the era of central banks and their fiat money is over? Because some very smart people and now a country with many more to follow have figured it out. These central, like George Soros did in 1993 when he broke the Bank of England in a speculative attack. So, I mean, how do you can't put that knowledge away now? People understand it. The central banks have let themselves open to this.
Well, I would say that we're seeing it obviously from the Michael Saylors and the El Salvadors, but even people today are doing it. And so I think we're seeing, shoot, I better go buy a house today because it's going to be too expensive in the future. I better go buy that used car today because it's going to be too expensive in the future. What they're really saying is my dollars are losing value so fast, I better go spend them. Kind of like in Weimar Republic, they had to go get paid multiple times a day because the value of the currency was falling too fast. And anybody who is buying Bitcoin instead of paying off debt is technically doing a speculative attack.
Right. Well, it goes a little deeper in that, for example, the Democrats or the left-wing party in America is trying to get the government to print more money to go to MMT, monetary theory. And but what's been figured out is that this cheap money can be used to buy assets. And by cooking your own goose. You know, it's financial suicide. I don't think the Democrats realize that the cat's out of the bag, and for every dollar they give away, they're creating $100 more bullets against the central bank, to the point where they're going to kill the central bank and the golden goose that laid the post-World War II American egg. I don't think they get it yet.
Yeah, they certainly don't get it. I mean, they've been trained in this Keynesian viewpoint, and they don't understand how that works, unfortunately. And you know, per the Keynesian multiplier, once we get over 90% debt to GDP, the debt doesn't get enough growth to be able to grow our way out of this. And so at this point, they're just continuing to dig the hole deeper and deeper and deeper. And now that we have Bitcoin, right? Now that we have the safety release valve, this safety boat, as you will, it only accelerates this, right? So the more that people move into Bitcoin out of the currency collapses and Bitcoin goes up, which makes more people go, and it just kind of accelerates that into that crack up boom scenario.
Now, I was in El Salvador and I saw Samson Mao on stage with President Bukele. He thinks that volcano bonds will enable the country to pay off their debt, approximately $20 billion. Within 10 years or so. You think that's a possibility?
I do, and I think there's massive demand for this because we've already seen Saylor do multiple rounds. Now we've seen like 6 Bitcoin mining companies do the same thing. So there's massive appetite for it. I think it's going to work out really well for them.
Alrighty, Mark Moss. He's from the Market Disruptor podcast. Thanks for being on Keiser Report.
Yeah, Max, always a pleasure. Thank you.
And that's going to do it for this edition of Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Mark Moss. Until next time, bye, y'all.